My name is Margaret Hale, and I was 62 years old when the quiet fault line in my marriage finally cracked open. For most of my adult life, I thought I understood the rhythm of stability. I married my husband, Daniel, when we were both 30, and for decades we lived a life that was comfortable, predictable, and mostly unremarkable. He worked in regional insurance underwriting, and I taught literature at the local community college. We raised one daughter, owned a modest but lovely house, and spent weekends tending to my rose garden and his obsessive collection of vintage radios. If anyone had asked me back then what my greatest worry was, I might have said something mundane like retirement savings or the onset of arthritis. I certainly wouldn't have guessed it had anything to do with money we loaned to Daniel's family, or how that money would unravel everything we had built. The trouble began in a very small way, the way a hairline crack appears in a porcelain bowl. A quiet comment. A shift in Daniel's tone whenever his siblings were mentioned. A whispered request for a short-term loan that somehow never seemed to be repaid. Daniel had always been the dependable older brother, the one everyone turned to when they needed something. And I had always stood just slightly behind him, trusting his decisions because he believed they were the right ones. But the truth was, I had started to feel it, the subtle but unmistakable sense that I was being pushed into the role of financier, not family. I saw it in the way his sister Lorraine spoke to me with syrupy sweetness when she needed something, then vanished once she had it. I saw it in the way Daniel avoided my eyes when I asked follow-up questions about the money that was supposed to come back. And I felt it most deeply the day I realized that our future was being mortgaged to protect his family's poor decisions. But I wasn't ready to see it yet. Not then. That year, Daniel's mother fell ill, and his siblings leaned on him even more. I didn't mind helping with groceries or medical bills. We'd always agreed that family should care for one another. What I did mind was being left out of the conversations about how much we were giving, and where that money was actually going. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, Daniel mentioned, almost casually, that he had lent his brother $5,000. I remember stopping mid-scrub, dish towel in hand. When? I asked. Oh, a few months ago, he murmured, as though it were an afterthought. And he's paying it back? Daniel hesitated. That was my first real clue. I'm sure he will, he said without looking at me. Something in my chest tightened. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was fear, quiet, cold, and unmistakable. Still, I tried to trust him. But trust, as I would soon learn, can decay slowly, like a rope fraying fiber by fiber, until the day it snaps. And the moment that destroyed ours began with a number I'll never forget. $24,000. A number his family swore they didn't owe. A number that would appear like a ghost in my divorce settlement. And the moment I learned the truth was the moment my marriage died. But that revelation didn't arrive all at once. It came in a sudden, brutal wave, on the day I opened a drawer I was never meant to see. And what I found inside would change everything. I still remember the exact weather that afternoon. Gray sky, cold wind, a hint of rain on the air. Daniel had left in a hurry for an appointment he forgot to tell me about, and I walked into his home office to grab the laptop charger he always stole from mine. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. Not consciously, anyway. But when I opened his desk drawer, something wedged in the back caught my attention. A thick envelope. Unlabeled. Heavy. At first, I assumed it was junk mail or warranty papers. Daniel kept everything, even appliance instructions from 15 years ago. But when I opened the envelope and saw the documents inside, my hands turned cold. Loan agreements. IOUs. Handwritten promises from his siblings and cousins. Dates. Names. Amounts. All of them addressed to Daniel. All of them with my handwriting at the bottom. Not because I signed anything, but because they were drafted on the templates I had created decades ago when we first agreed to lend small sums to family only if there was documentation. It was a system meant to protect us both. But none of these documents had ever been shown to me. And at the bottom of each was a number, scribbled in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Balance unpaid. I sat down slowly, my knees suddenly weak. One document showed a loan of $4,000, another $8,000, a third $12,000, and so on, each with partial repayments never made. I added the totals with trembling fingers. $24,000. Almost exactly. But what made my breath stop was not the number itself. It was the dates. These weren't from years ago. These were recent. Recent enough that the money had come from our retirement savings. Money that, according to Daniel, we needed to be careful with. My stomach tightened as the implications sank in. He had lied. Repeatedly. He had taken our shared future, our cushion for old age, our security, and funneled it into a bottomless pit of family obligations without telling me. As I flipped through the documents, something even more unsettling emerged. Notes written in Daniel's hurried script. Don't tell Maggie yet. She'll be upset. They'll pay it back soon. She doesn't need to be involved. The betrayal hit me harder than the numbers. He knew I wouldn't have agreed. He knew. And he did it anyway. When I confronted him that night, he didn't deny it. He simply sighed, sat down, and rubbed his temples as if my shock was an inconvenience. They needed help, he said flatly. And what about us? I whispered. They said they'd pay it back. All 24,000? At that, he hesitated. And in that hesitation, I understood everything. We were never getting it back. His family had used us. Used him. And used me. Without ever looking me in the eye, without ever thanking me, without ever intending to repay a cent. I slept in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing that trust can vanish in one brutal instant. Daniel had broken something he could never fix. But what I didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning. Because the next morning, his sister Lorraine called me directly. Margaret, she said, her tone cold and unrecognizable, I don't know what Daniel told you, but we don't owe you anything. And her next sentence ended any illusion of civility between us. You gave that money willingly. So don't you dare come asking for it now. Something inside me hardened. The line was drawn. And I was done being quiet. To understand why Daniel's betrayal cut so deeply, you need to know the history, both his and mine. I grew up in a family where money was tight but integrity was non-negotiable. My parents taught me that a person's word was their bond, and that debts, whether financial or emotional, were to be honored. We didn't borrow lightly. And we repaid even when it hurt. Daniel's family was the opposite. The first time I met them decades ago, I sensed a particular dynamic. Daniel as the reliable anchor, and everyone else leaning on him like a crutch. His siblings treated him not like a brother, but like a safety net. They adored him, yes, but their affection was always tethered to a need. Back then, I rationalized it as closeness. I wanted to believe I was marrying into a large, warm clan. But over the years, patterns emerged. Lorraine, the eldest sister, had a knack for mismanaging her finances. A new car she couldn't afford. A failed business. A luxury trip she justified with, it was on sale. Each disaster ended with her calling Daniel. His younger brother Harris was a dreamer with a record of unfinished projects. A coffee truck that never launched. A real estate course he never completed. A promise to pay us back next month that quietly dissolved. And Daniel, sweet, earnest Daniel, could never say no. It wasn't generosity. It was guilt. Their father had died young, leaving Daniel at 19, to pick up responsibilities far beyond his years. Lorraine and Harris idolized him for it, but they also exploited it, smoothing their failures with his sacrifices. I had tried for years to set boundaries, gently at first, then firmly. But Daniel always defaulted to old patterns. Every family crisis became ours. Every irresponsible decision became our obligation. And every protest I made was brushed aside as though I were an outsider, a voice without weight. You don't understand my family, Daniel would say. This is how we help each other. But help implies effort from both sides. What his family wanted wasn't help. It was funding. And the moment I discovered the hidden loans, everything clicked into place. Not just the deceit, but the motive behind it. Daniel wasn't protecting his family. He was protecting himself from disappointing them. The painful part was realizing he wasn't protecting me at all. As I lay awake night after night, the memories resurfaced. Moments when Daniel had chosen their comfort over our security, their approval over our partnership. It was as if the entire history of our marriage had been rewritten in stark relief. But part of me still hoped Daniel would see reason, acknowledge the harm, and stand with me. That hope evaporated the day we invited his siblings over to discuss the loans. They didn't come to talk. They came to deny. They came to belittle. And in Lorraine's eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: contempt. "We never asked you for anything, Margaret," she sneered, even as I held the signed IOUs in my hand. "This was between us and Dan. Between us and Dan." As if I were a stranger in my own marriage. Something inside me shifted that day. Not a snap, not a break, but a quiet, resolute turning. A decision formed in the very core of my being. If they were determined to disrespect me, I would give them no more opportunities. If they refused to repay what they owed, I would find another way to reclaim what was mine. And as for Daniel, the man I married was no longer standing beside me. The man sitting across from me, a husband who hid debts, who enabled manipulation, who dismissed my place in our marriage, was someone I no longer recognized. That realization hurt more than betrayal. But it also made one thing unmistakably clear. My marriage was ending. And I would not be leaving empty-handed. The next chapter of my life began not with rage, but with precision. Revenge, when ethical, is rarely dramatic. It is methodical, grounded in truth, and rooted in documentation. And Daniel had given me plenty of documentation. For 3 weeks, I combed through every financial record, bank statements, retirement withdrawals, credit card transactions, and those hidden IOUs. I created a timeline charting every loan Daniel had issued without my consent. I highlighted dates, signatures, transfer confirmations, and text messages. What I discovered was even worse than I expected. Daniel had made 8 separate withdrawals totaling $24,000 over 18 months. Most were labeled temporary transfer, a phrase he used to disguise personal loans. All withdrawals came from our joint retirement fund. And none, absolutely none, had been repaid. But the most damning evidence wasn't financial. It was emotional. I found message threads between Daniel and his siblings in which they laughed about my strict budgeting. In one, Lorraine wrote, "Just tell her it was for Mom or something. She'll calm down eventually." Calm down. Because in their eyes, my concern for our financial stability was nothing more than an inconvenience. My chest tightened when I read Daniel's response. "I'll handle it. She doesn't need to know." Not once did he defend me. Not once did he insist on repayment. Not once did he prioritize our marriage. Instead, he protected the very people draining us dry. But as painful as the discovery was, it also fueled my resolve. I met with a divorce attorney. Quietly, professionally, without anger. Her name was Evelyn, a sharp, insightful woman in her 70s who had seen every shade of marital betrayal. Once I laid out the documentation, she leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, "You're in a stronger position than you think." She asked me one question. "Do you want to recover the money, or do you want accountability?" "Both," I replied without hesitation. Evelyn nodded, understanding completely. "Then we'll let the numbers speak for you." We drafted a plan. I would file for divorce on the grounds of financial deception. I would present the documented evidence. I would calculate the exact amount siphoned from our shared assets without my consent. And I would subtract that amount, down to the cent, from Daniel's half of the marital estate. It was not vindictive. It was justice. Quiet. Legal. Precise. But it required one final piece of evidence. My husband admitting the truth. So I set the stage. A calm conversation in the living room. A phone recording placed discreetly in my pocket. A script rehearsed carefully, not to trap him, but to give him a chance to be honest. When the moment arrived, I called Daniel into the room. "I need clarity," I said softly. "Did you loan your family a total of $24,000 from our retirement funds without telling me?" Daniel froze. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sank into the chair and exhaled. "Yes," he whispered. "I did. Did they ever intend to pay it back?" A pause. "No. Probably not. Did you know that when you gave them the money?" Another pause. "Yes." My heart broke, again, but my recording device caught every word. And in that instant, the final piece of my strategy fell perfectly into place. Daniel looked at me with guilt, perhaps expecting anger or tears. But I simply nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." He didn't yet know that this truth would cost him far more than money. The truth does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it settles with a soft weight, heavy enough to change everything. In the days that followed that recorded confession, Daniel remained strangely distant, as though he sensed a shift but couldn't name it. I didn't provoke arguments. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention divorce. Instead, I finalized every detail with my attorney. Asset evaluations, retirement statements, home appraisal, the precise calculation of the marital estate. At every meeting, Evelyn smiled approvingly. "You've done the work," she said. "This will be clean." But Daniel's family was about to make things much messier. 2 days before I filed, Lorraine called again. Her voice was sharper this time, teetering between arrogance and panic. "I heard you're still asking about that money," she snapped. "Let me repeat myself, Margaret. It was not a loan. Families help each other. If you want it back, that's between you and your husband." Her confidence almost amused me. "Lorraine," I said calmly, "I have written loan agreements." She scoffed. "Dan shouldn't have kept those. And anyway, good luck enforcing them." The contempt in her tone was staggering. But it also revealed something important. They were certain I had no power. People who believe you are powerless always underestimate the moment you stand up. The next day, I delivered the divorce papers. Daniel's face went pale as he read them. He looked up at me with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Yes," I said gently. "This marriage ended when you gave away our future without telling me." He swallowed hard. "We can fix this." "The time to fix it," I replied, "was before you lied." The settlement proposal listed everything clearly. All marital assets divided evenly. All retirement savings accounted for. All debts itemized. Then the final line. Adjustment, $24,137 subtracted from Daniel Hale's share, representing funds removed from marital assets without spousal consent. Daniel stared at the number, stunned. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I can," I said. "And I already have legal grounds." He shook his head, still unable to process it. "This will make my family hate you." "They already do," I replied gently. "But that's not my concern anymore." Word spread quickly among his siblings. Within hours, my phone lit up with messages ranging from indignation to outright hostility. "How dare you take money from Daniel just to punish us? You're vindictive and ungrateful. You're ruining our family. You had everything. Why do you need the money?" I read each message without reacting. Then I forwarded them, all of them, to Evelyn. She smiled. "These strengthen your case," she said. "Thank them for their honesty." But the real turning point came a week later, when Daniel's brother Harris showed up on our doorstep, red-faced and furious. "You're destroying him," he stormed. "You're taking everything." I looked at him calmly. "No," I said. "I'm taking back only what was mine." He opened his mouth to argue but froze when I handed him copies of the IOUs, highlighted in yellow. "Your signature," I said softly. Your agreement. For the first time, his bravado cracked. You weren't supposed to see those, he muttered. Daniel wasn't supposed to hide them. He turned and left without another word. For once, silence was on my side. The truth had finally caught up to all of them. But the confrontation, the one that would end everything, was still ahead. And Daniel's family was about to face a reality they had spent years avoiding. I knew the confrontation had to be controlled, calm, and irrefutable. No yelling. No chaos. Just truth. Documented and undeniable. Daniel asked for a meeting with me, his siblings, and his mother. I agreed, but only if it was on neutral ground. We chose a small conference room at Evelyn's office. I could feel their resentment before they even entered the room. Lorraine marched in first, her chin lifted in theatrical indignation. Harris followed, avoiding eye contact. Their mother, frail but sharp-eyed, sat quietly beside them. Daniel looked exhausted. I remained composed. Evelyn sat beside me, a silent pillar. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lorraine struck first. I can't believe you're doing this, she snapped. You're humiliating our family over money we never agreed to repay. Evelyn raised a hand. Let's keep this civil. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the IOUs, bank statements, screenshots of messages, and the recorded transcript of Daniel's confession. You may deny the loans, I said, but the documents don't lie. Lorraine scoffed. Dan made those agreements, not us. Daniel's face tightened. You all signed them. She waved him off. You pressured us. Evelyn stepped in. These are legally binding agreements. Harris slammed his fist on the table. She's stealing from us. I spoke quietly. I am reclaiming funds removed from my retirement without consent. Then I looked directly at Daniel. You took money that belonged to both of us. Without telling me. Without asking permission. And you gave it away knowing it would never be repaid. Daniel closed his eyes. His siblings glared at him, as though he were betraying them now simply by confronting the truth. His mother spoke softly. Margaret, dear. Do you really need to take this to court? Evelyn leaned forward. The settlement is generous. No one is asking any of you to repay anything directly. The adjustment is internal between spouses. Lorraine exploded. So you're punishing Dan for helping us? I met her eyes. No. I'm protecting myself after decades of being left out of decisions that affected my life. Then I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the printed text messages where Daniel reassured his siblings he would handle me. Their mother's face fell. You said that, she whispered. Daniel swallowed, shame creeping over him. I thought I was doing the right thing. No, I said softly. You were avoiding conflict at my expense. For the first time, the room fell silent. Lorraine started to speak again, but Evelyn raised a firm hand. This discussion is not about feelings or opinions. It is about legal ownership of marital assets. Margaret is entitled to full reimbursement. We are offering a peaceful adjustment instead of litigation. Daniel wiped his face, overwhelmed. What happens if I don't agree? He whispered. Evelyn answered calmly. Then we go to court. And based on these documents, the adjustment will likely be larger. The color drained from his face. And then, something shifted. His siblings, who had expected him to defend their entitlement, realized he couldn't. Because the evidence was absolute. Because the truth was indisputable. And because, for the first time in his life, Daniel understood that enabling his family had destroyed his marriage. He looked at me, not with anger, but with regret deep enough to carve new lines into his aging face. I'll sign, he said quietly. Lorraine gasped. Harris cursed under his breath. But I simply nodded. The confrontation was over. Ethical, factual, incontrovertible. And all that remained now were the consequences. The signing of the settlement felt both monumental and strangely quiet. Daniel moved through the process like a man walking underwater. Slow, heavy, resigned. His siblings didn't speak to me afterward. Lorraine stormed out of the office without looking back. Harris muttered something about me destroying their family, though it was their own actions that had set this in motion. Within days, the legal transfer of assets was completed. The $24,000 was subtracted from Daniel's share, just as documented. I kept the house, half the remaining retirement funds, and a clean future. He moved into a small rental nearby. It wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. But consequences have a way of rippling outward, touching even those who think they are immune. Daniel's siblings, who had taken the money so freely, began distancing themselves from him. Not because they felt guilty, but because they blamed him for letting me manipulate the divorce. They resented him for signing the settlement, for not fighting harder, for not protecting their access to his resources. For the first time, he tasted the reality I had seen for decades. They loved him only when he was useful. Once he no longer had access to our shared funds, their affection evaporated. Daniel tried reaching out to them, but the conversations were clipped and cold. Lorraine stopped inviting him to family gatherings. Harris blocked his number for a time. Their mother kept contact but grew frail and weary, too tired to mediate the resentment brewing among her children. And in the midst of that isolation, Daniel visited me one afternoon. Not to argue, not to plead, but to apologize. He stood on my porch, holding a small box. "These are the radios," he said. "The ones you always said made the house feel cluttered. I thought, maybe you'd want the space now." I studied him carefully. He looked older, tired, and yet there was a clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "I didn't end the marriage to punish you," I said gently. "I ended it to protect myself." He nodded. "I know. I should have protected you too." His regret was genuine. And though the wounds were deep, hearing him acknowledge the truth mattered more than I expected. We spoke for a while. Calmly, honestly, without bitterness. He admitted that he had always been afraid of disappointing his family, that he'd spent his entire life trying to earn their approval, even at his own expense. Even at mine. "I didn't realize how much I relied on you to keep us stable," he said. "You were the only one who ever looked out for me without taking something." It was a painful truth, and strangely healing. After he left, I stood in the quiet of my living room, feeling a mix of sadness and peace. Justice had been served, not dramatically, not vindicatively, but with clarity and dignity. I had defended my future. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. And I had done it without violence, deception, or cruelty. His family. They reaped the consequences of their entitlement. They lost their access to Daniel's wallet, and eventually, to his loyalty. Their resentment isolated them, and in the end, they had no one to blame but themselves. The marriage was over. But I had my integrity, my security, and, for the first time in decades, my independence. And yet, the story wasn't finished. Because closure is not just about justice. It's about reflection. In the weeks that followed the divorce, I learned something essential about myself. I learned that strength is often quiet, deliberate, and patient. It isn't always loud confrontation or dramatic revenge. Sometimes it is simply the act of saying, "Enough." I sat in my garden often, pruning roses and listening to the wind move through the leaves. My life was quieter now. But it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes from reclaiming your voice after years of suppressing it. One afternoon, I found myself reflecting on the last 30 years. The love, the mistakes, the patterns I had ignored. I remembered the good in Daniel, the gentle man I married, the man who once made me laugh so easily. And I also acknowledged the choices that had broken us. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's understanding. Understanding that people can be good and still flawed. That loyalty without boundaries is not loyalty. It is self-erasure. That love cannot survive without respect, transparency, and partnership. Daniel and I eventually reached a place of calm civility. Not friendship, not romance, but mutual respect. He continued spending time with our daughter. I encouraged it. Divorce did not erase him as a father. His family, on the other hand, never apologized. Not once. Not for the money, not for the insults, not for the entitlement. They continued to paint me as the villain in their version of the story. But that opinion no longer mattered. Because justice had been served. And closure does not require approval from the guilty. The $24,000 I reclaimed wasn't just money. It was a symbol, a reclaiming of years of being dismissed, minimized, and financially undermined. It was a message that boundaries matter, that silence is not consent, and that a woman does not have to accept being overshadowed, ignored, or sacrificed. As I sit here now, I speak not only for myself, but for every person who has ever been told to just let it go, or don't make waves, or family comes first. Family should never mean erasing yourself. Family should not require one person to bear everyone else's consequences. And marriage, true marriage, should be a partnership, not a secret arrangement that drains one partner for the convenience of the other. My story is one of betrayal, yes. But it is also one of clarity, of reclaiming, of transformation. And I share it so that others might recognize the moment when silence becomes self-harm, and when speaking up becomes an act of self-respect. If you've listened this far, I'd like to ask you, have you ever lent money you never saw again? Have you ever been pressured by family to sacrifice more than you should? Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to lose yourself in the process? Share your experiences in the comments. Your voice might help someone who needs it. This was my story, and I hope it brings strength to someone who needs it today.